I must have been no taller than a lamppost when my parents resettled us in a small, unassuming corner of Bridleford, New Hampshire. The place was a quiet development of squat duplexes, arranged around 3 looping cul-de-sacs, all of them feeding into a single road that wound back to the main highway like a narrow vein. Behind the homes, standing as new and proud as a fresh coat of paint, was Hawthorne Primary School, which in time became a beacon for young families hoping to rent a place that felt safe and settled. By the time my 8th birthday had come and gone, the neighborhood, once a sleepy refuge for retirees, had transformed into a lively outpost of families with children of all ages. Naturally, we banded together the way children do when left to shape their own world. I was the youngest among them, and because of that, I occasionally found myself the butt of jokes or playful torment. But generally speaking, we were a good-natured bunch. Most afternoons drifted past in a blur of kickball games, half-invented competitions, and the frantic joy of racing the ever-fading daylight. When the older boys pedaled off to play football, the rest of us occupied ourselves with marbles, jacks, or foursquare chalked sloppily onto the pavement. And come summer, when the warm nights seemed to stretch on forever, we'd stay out well past the hour the streetlights flickered awake, losing ourselves in manhunt or hide-and-seek, until our mothers' voices finally called us home. For a time, it was all simple, earnest fun. But as I prepared to enter the 3rd grade, the oldest boy in our troop, Raymond Baxter, decided to introduce a bit of mischief into our tidy little world. Raymond had about 4 years on me, which made him, in my young eyes, a figure of dreadful authority. One warm evening, while the sky was the color of tarnished brass, he told me in a low, ominous voice that a hag lived in the thicket behind Hawthorne Primary. According to him, she snatched up children and swallowed them whole. Gullible as I was, I believed every word. It wasn't even a particularly polished tale. He spun it offhandedly, as though he had just remembered something important and thought I ought to know. I carried the story to the others, wide-eyed and whispering, and before long it reached my parents, who, after some gentle amusement, helped me realize Raymond had been pulling my leg. Still, the damage had been done. The story grew legs of its own. Before we knew it, the so-called Bridleford crone became a kind of game among us, a secret we all privately disbelieved, yet we were delighted to pretend it was true. Without ever agreeing, we developed a set of rules. A ball lost in the woods was lost forever. Anyone bold or foolish enough to cross deeper than a few paces into the shadows risked being dragged away. And should one misplace a toy indoors, it meant the crone had set her sights on you. Worst of all, if you ever glimpsed her, you must not, under any condition, break eye contact. We conjured her in our minds in grotesque detail. A gaunt, angular creature with limbs bent wrong at the joints, skin stretched so thin across her frame that each bone pressed outward like dull knives, a mouth bristling with uneven, predatory teeth. By daylight she possessed clouded, milky eyes, too weak for the sun. At night, her gaze shimmered like a pair of ghostly lanterns suspended in the dark. Of course, the thrill was in pretending, not believing. Years drifted by, families moved away, others arrived. We passed the story down to newcomers like a hazing ritual, and they in turn embellished it before growing old enough to forget it. When I reached 13, our once bustling circle had shrunk to just 6. We were all on the verge of outgrowing one another, and most days it felt as though the seams of our little childhood club were coming apart. The crone's legend lingered only as an occasional tool we used to scare our younger brothers and sisters. Otherwise, she had been packed away with all the other relics of childhood. Or so we thought. Everything changed the night that followed. October arrived with a peculiar chill that year, the kind that seeped in early and settled over Hawthorne Primary like a warning. The school board had begun a fresh round of construction, plans for a proper athletic field and an enlarged parking lot. All of it required tearing down the woods that had cradled our neighborhood for as long as any of us could recall. For all our teasing and tall tales, the thought of losing those trees stirred something sentimental in us, though none of us would have admitted it outright. It was Raymond Baxter who first proposed we skip the usual Halloween mischief and venture into the woods instead. The idea sounded absurd at the time. Trick-or-treating was sacred tradition. But gradually, the notion took hold. This would be our last chance for a genuine fright, before bulldozers reduced our imagined monsters' home to nothing but raw earth. So come Halloween evening, we gathered at Margaret Cooley's house, pretending we intended to roam the neighborhood for candy. We made a polite circuit of the block, long enough to appease any watchful parents, and by 8 o'clock we were slipping over the low fence that separated the schoolyard from the homes beyond. If any one of us had been alone, I suspect we'd have turned tail and gone straight home. We trudged deeper for what felt like a half hour, though Raymond insisted it had been no more than 20 minutes before he declared we'd reached the proper place to rest. He carried one of his father's camping lanterns, a battered brass contraption that flickered fitfully, and set it down as we gathered to swap ghost stories and act foolish to mask our nerves. Then Margaret stumbled upon it. Raymond's kid brother, Arthur, had been chasing her when she darted over a patch of ground that answered her step with a hollow wooden thump. The sound froze all of us. We circled around as she scraped at the loose soil with the toe of her shoe. Beneath the thin layer of dirt lay broad wooden planks. We worked together, brushing and kicking away the earth until a rope handle emerged, fixed to what was unmistakably a trapdoor. It shouldn't have been there. There was no reason for a cellar, if that's what it was, to exist in the middle of the woods. The rope creaked as Raymond pulled, and the door swung open with unsettling ease. A sour gust of air rose from the darkness below. None of us spoke at first. Even Raymond hesitated. Helen, ever the cautious one, urged us to leave the thing alone, that if we absolutely had to know what lay beneath, we should return in daylight. Sarah and I agreed at once. Even Raymond seemed ready to retreat. But Ned Harper wasn't having it. He scoffed at our nerves, grabbed the flashlight clean out of Margaret's hand, and descended the narrow wooden steps without waiting for permission. Arthur hurried after him, and Raymond, uneasy but unwilling to abandon his younger brother, followed. I wished more than anything to run home and erase the night from my mind, but some cold weight in my stomach insisted I keep going. Leaving them in that hole felt unbearable. So down I went, while Helen and Sarah remained at the surface, pale, wide-eyed, and holding hands. The cellar was colder than it had any right to be, and the air was heavy with the damp smell of rotting wood. Raymond lifted the lantern, and its unsteady glow revealed rows of wooden shelves lining the walls. At first glance, it all looked like forgotten junk, dusty trinkets, broken toys, bits of string and cloth. Then, Ned raised a small rubber ball decorated with cartoon faces, faded but unmistakable. Recognition struck us all at once. These weren't random odds and ends. They were ours. Lost footballs, missing toys, kites that had vanished into tree branches years before. Every item we'd mourned or forgotten lay arranged neatly on those shelves, waiting for someone to notice. And that was the moment the woods no longer felt like play. A cold prickle ran down my spine when I understood what I was looking at. Even now, decades later, I can recall that same icy sweat gathering at the base of my neck. It was Arthur who first noticed the openings cut into the cellar walls, narrow tunnels that burrowed outward as though something had carved its way to the surface. He stepped back in alarm, and his heel came down on something brittle. We thought he'd broken a twig, but when Raymond lifted the lantern, the truth came into view. The floor was littered with tiny bones, dozens of them, pale and delicate as bird remains. That was all any of us needed. We scrambled out of that pit with no regard for dignity. I don't believe a single one of us said a word to Helen or Sarah on our way up, but whatever they saw in our faces convinced them there was nothing to question. We never did discover what lived down there, or what used that place as its den. We talked, once or twice, about confessing the whole thing to our parents, but each of us knew that it would be just brushed off as childish nonsense. So we waited, silently, for the construction crews to find the cellar. But they never did. The woods were cleared, the ground bulldozed, and the cellar, along with everything in it, simply vanished under the new field. After that autumn, our group unraveled. No arguments, no falling out, just a quiet drifting apart, as though we carried something we didn't want anyone else to notice. Years passed. I married, moved away, lived the noisy life of the city, and tried my best to forget. Now I'm in my 30s, and my wife and I recently relocated to a pleasant suburban street where our little boy Michael has more room to play. A month ago, he began speaking about an imaginary friend, a girl he calls Agnes. Michael has always had a lively imagination, so at first I thought nothing of it. But then came the noises, a steady rustling and faint scraping in the crawl space above the bedroom. My wife says it's squirrels in the attic. Michael insists it is Agnes, who lives up there now, and only comes out after dark. Soon after that, things began disappearing. Small, familiar things. My wife's pearl clasp, one of Michael's toy cars, my favorite shirt. 2 days ago, I asked him plainly if he knew anything about the items that had gone missing. He looked at me with utter bewilderment, as though I'd forgotten some shared secret. He said Agnes and I used to be friends, that we knew each other long ago. I snapped at him then, more sharply than I meant to, and sent him to bed without dessert. At the time, I told myself he was just trying to frighten me with childish nonsense. But since that conversation, all those old memories have forced their way back to the surface. Ghost tales are common in every town. Every neighborhood has some story children whisper in the dark. And we all ask ourselves, sooner or later, whether monsters are real. I'm no longer certain how to answer. It is sometime after 3 in the morning now. The house is still, but I can hear the sound again. That soft tearing of the wood, as though nails are worrying at the inside of the wall. The room is in complete darkness, except for a pair of faint, shining points peering through a knothole near the floor. 2 pale orbs, unblinking. They watch me as the scratching grows louder. I now know it wasn't squirrels in the crawl space. It's Agnes, working her way through the boards. Every instinct I have screams for me to turn away, to hide my face beneath the blankets and pretend this isn't happening. But I recall the old rule from our childhood game. If she ever looked at you, you must never look away. And so I stare at those glowing eyes, praying dawn will come quickly.